Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. This episode is brought to you by Sotheby's Institute of Art, dedicated to the study of art and its markets for over 50 years. With programs in London, New York, and online, students gain first-hand knowledge, art historical scholarship, and business acumen through innovative courses led by experts from a global community of art professionals. Visit sothebysinstitute.com to explore programs from master's degrees to short courses and more. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Katy Wickremesinghe, British Sri Lankan entrepreneur and founder of KTW London and the Wick. I speak to Katy about her businesses, both KTW London, a communications consultancy operating in the cultural sector, along with the Wick, an activation hub and content platform. We cover many bases, speaking about the moment she decided to venture into entrepreneurship to what her day-to-day looks like now as a CEO. We delve into what it means to her to be connecting the culturally curious, a phrase deeply ingrained in the mission of her business. She gives tips to budding entrepreneurs in the art PR realm, as well as a forecast on the future of the industry, and so much more. Thank you, Katy, for coming on the podcast. Before we dive into the episode, I want to take a minute of your time to mention that All About Art is on Patreon. We are mostly volunteer-led, but in order to cover running costs and other expenses, we make it possible for our lovely listeners to support us, ranging from £1 a month to the price of an oat latte a month, or on the higher end, the price of a Sunday brunch per month, depending on the tier you want to choose. If every person who listens to the podcast signed up for the £1 tier on our Patreon, we would be able to sustain the podcast while also having scope to produce episodes more frequently and expand our activities in demystifying the professional arts sector. So, if you want to receive early access to episodes and behind-the-scenes content, maybe you want to get some merch, or if you just love what we do and want to support us, I would be thrilled if you considered signing up. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes. Also, thank you to our sponsors at Synergy Associates, the art world tech gurus, for supporting this episode's production at their clubhouse on Pall Mall. You can find more about Synergy and their facilities in the show notes. And now, on to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Katy.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased we could make it happen.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to have a chat for ages with you. You're doing great work. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have you on. So to start us off, I would love for you to tell listeners about your background. Could you tell us more about how you developed your career? What did you study and what experiences did you gain?
So I'm London born and I'm a British Sri Lankan. And so for me, I decided to go to university outside of London. I was always quite passionate about doing something to explore what I was already interested in. I was hugely passionate about the arts and literature when I was at school. But I would say that that was rooted actually more in the history sense, the pure history elements. And also, funnily enough, as my job has dictated, very much passionate around the sociological aspects of life, around how humans connect, why they connect, what these stories are that act as kind of, I suppose, blotting papers and mark makers to our life and to the transitions that we as individuals and countries have. So I went to study history at Wick University. I had a fantastic university experience, and I was fortunate that at the time, the history degree at Wick University was one of the leading ones in the country, and there was an opportunity to apply to go to Venice and study in the third year of that degree. And during that third year, you could study in Venice, and there were 30 historians and 30 art historians, and there was actually real fluidity and access to be able to go to each other's lectures during that time. So you'd get, the boat to work, or to school, you would be able to go to art history lectures and also do the lectures that were required for your own degree. So I felt like that was a really exciting kind of foray into art history and a touch upon it. And then I always was interested in communicating. It's something I think is so important, not just as a discipline, as a job and as a career, but to be able to express ourselves, to have the power over our own language around the way that we enable communications, enable effective communications, enable community growth through that. And I always found that I had a real passion naturally for writing, for speaking, for translating ideas, even from university stage. And so I went into a role in public relations, and I was very sort of tenacious, I would say. I kept writing to different companies and including kind of Saatchi and kind of big global companies at the time. And I was very fortunate that I took on a role at Freud's. When I joined, there was 30 people and ended up staying over the course of nearly 11 years. And when I left, there was 230 people. So that was an incredibly big part of my career journey. And that then led me to having a real passion and understanding for global brand, for culture, for the importance of culture in the way that we build. We build an important element around placemaking, around tourism and destination. And that then led me to have a passion to be able to start KTW. But I think Freud's was an unusual experience because we had ex-former number 10 aides and ministers who would be working with us on reputation management. The current CEO is a former head of sustainability from Cambridge. We had people who had been running major television companies and networks. So it was a real sort of plethora of skill sets, which now looking back was such a privilege to be in rooms, listening to these people speak, learning the real sort of trades around publishing, marketing, reputation management, PR, and all of those things became part of that career path.
Yeah. I wonder if they do that still at Warwick University. Do they still do that where they can send students away for the third year?
I believe that course still exists. It was very kind of a well-known course, and it's created some, it's such an interesting course because I think when you're taken out of your natural environment and plonked into another place in all walks of life at any age and stage, it forces you to see things quite differently. So it was a great learning experience for me.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely understand that as someone who moved from Austria to London to go to university, getting plonked into a completely new environment. It, not necessarily sink or swim, but it was very much like, okay, here is this whole new thing that you have the privilege to experience. But it's also like, oh, this is not the easiest thing. But totally. I feel like you become a stronger professional student, all of that. You become a stronger person through that because you get to know what your boundaries are. You get to know other cultures. You get to know how to sort of rely on yourself as well a little bit more.
Completely. I think self-reliance and also feeling a bit vulnerable and insecure can bring out the best of us because it enables us to connect with people in quite a different way. And I was also fortunate that I came from a family, I suppose, being half British and half Sri Lankan, having an East meets West familial culture. Inadvertently, I only realized in later life, led me to be exposed to different types of culture, which maybe, at the time, I probably took for granted, different types of food, different types of books, different types of art on the wall, chairs and woodworks in my family home, which were kind of, made from materials and brought over from Sri Lanka, or my father speaking Sinhalese sometimes when I woke up on a Saturday, and that I took for granted. And my mum was also very passionate about art history. So we used to go many a time to the Tate, and we always had this thing where she would stand me in front of a painting for 15 minutes and I would just have to stand and look at the painting and tell her exactly what I could see. And we would talk about the story in the painting because I loved creative writing and still do. And I think that practice in itself really helped me to be more observant and to be able to express what I'm seeing and to also to learn and to be curious and to really think about things in a deeper way.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get on to the topic of curiosity, but I think that what you've just described is something that I had the experience of when I came to study art history. My mom didn't really take me to museums. I didn't really grow up around art that much. And I think it was so valuable when my professors told me, okay, go to the museum and sit in front of the painting. Don't just, go from painting to painting or start writing about it, when we were writing essays or had to think about these things, don't just start right away. Actually just sit for a minute and think. And it taught me how to look. And that, in turn, has affected how I approach everything in life. I can be more introspective and more thoughtful about how I approach things because of my engagement with art, which, as I said, we will get onto that topic later on in the episode. But for my next question, I want to ask you about your role as CEO and founder of KTW London, a communications consultancy operating in the cultural sector that you've been running for over a decade. In 2021, however, you also founded the Wick, an activation hub and content platform to, and I quote, connect the culturally curious. Can you take me through your business journey and what made you form KTW and latterly the Wick?
Mm-hmm. So it was a really kind of a mixture of luck and timing, really. I left Freud's after 11 years, not for any bad reason. I absolutely loved my experience there. And I'd been working on kind of global businesses at the time, like everything from Soho House Group to Burberry, Gordon Ramsay, working with the old Wick, and a huge number of launches and moments that linked also to government, to the Mayor of London's office. And it was difficult to leave. But I think for me, I realised that in the context of quite big personal changes, I had been living with a partner at the time. I was planning a wedding, and I effectively decided that I wanted to shift my life in many different ways, both personally and professionally. And I think this link between where we are personally and, I suppose, at times feeling, isolated, unsure, not quite feeling connected with ourselves. I knew that there was something in my life that I wasn't addressing or was missing or needed a kind of direction change. And then I realized that these three things, and it's funny because they are on the bottom of my email, actually, on the work email of everyone who works with us, is connection, education, and inspiration. And I realized through this journey of the self, and also kind of looking at that time, that I wanted to create something that brought those things out in my career, not just kind of on the side. And I touched on cultural projects at Freud's. We'd been working with Azerbaijan, building culture through Baku. I'd worked to launch Pace Gallery as part of the Royal Academy with Molly Dent-Brocklehurst, which was a wonderful experience. I'd worked with Steve Lazaridis on various projects linked to Banksy and PepsiCo. So I'd always, Matthew Freud's an incredible, passionate art collector and cultural innovator. So I'd had the ability and the privilege to touch upon it, but not at a deep level, art world, cultural level that I felt was what I needed. And I effectively bumped into an art dealer through my prior job called Harry Blaine at the time. He was running a fantastically successful gallery called Blaine Southern, which was formerly Haunch of Venison. And so I suddenly found myself in this world, which I had not been familiar with, working on the Lynn Chadwick estate, working with a lot of the YBA artists, and working to represent their shows and build an understanding of them. And so I spent the first few years of this business journey really kind of feeling a bit fish out of water, having to learn from scratch again, despite having come from running a global team, being extremely sort of a high position in a big business, to being me, a laptop, in an industry that I was not familiar with a lot of people that I did not have relationships with. And so I spent the first few years really building and understanding the market, the art market, understanding the key individuals and players. But most importantly, I could see very, very clearly at the time, I mean, we're speaking in 2025, and this was back in 2013. And at the time, there really was not this much needed conversation between global business and what we call the art world or the art market. And I couldn't understand why working with this gallery, which was so incredible, and at the time they had a Maris Bircher show, they'd just done a Tim Noble and Sue Webster show and fantastic art exhibitions. And I couldn't understand why people were walking past these galleries, not coming in the front door, obviously feeling intimidated. And I suddenly realized, well, the art world definitely wants the currency and connectivity of all of these other industries that I had been working very deeply in, kind of creative industries, fashion, film, technologies. And those creative industries wanted a real sort of academic touch point and opening point and ability to speak directly with art and artists, but they just couldn't sort of find the entry point. And so KTW really was formed to be a connector or a bridge between these 2 points and to be a navigator into a world that at times can feel very closed and difficult to reach, hard to access. And so effectively that was where the consultancy sort of was born and grew from.
Yeah. And moving on to the Wick, what are your ambitions with that?
So the Wick came about in 2021, and it came about really naturally. The Wick was really a result of having an incredibly engaged community. We were realizing that through our amazing projects with brands and corporates, private individuals and collectors, we'd worked at that time with Mont Blanc, launching galleries, working with Belmont, and we'd worked with Fortnum & Mason, representing their art collections. And what I was finding is that people were really starting to come to me very, very regularly and saying, please, could you help us? You're a normal, in parentheses, person that we feel we can ask the stupid questions to. And I was like, look, no question is stupid. We're all on a learning journey effectively in the space, and so much of it is subjective. But effectively what they were looking for was a place to learn and understand. And the Wick really was born, I suppose, out of a resource that was not there when I started my business, that would have been so incredibly helpful. And coming from a background of talent and entertainment and strategic perspective in creative industry, I realized that there were, fantastic leaders in the cultural sector, museum directors, organizational leaders who are doing great things and evoking great change, brilliant artists who in the wider world, people didn't know what they looked like, what they were doing, what their jobs were, how you could speak to them, what their personal stories and journeys were. So the Wick really is a kind of journal of record of all of those people. So cultural leaders, creative industry leaders who are evoking great change, mixed with artists and innovators and creators who are actually making great art. But sometimes people wanted to have a breadcrumb of understanding around the process and practice and how to have those conversations. And that has really grown. So now, cut to a few years on, it's exciting to see that people know the Wick way beyond, this London where we're speaking now. I recently went to Istanbul. I've been to Colombo in Sri Lanka, to Berlin, and people are really familiar with the platform. And I think, it's a global platform. And I think technology allows us to do that. It allows us to scale our stories so well. And most importantly, I think what's exciting about it is they're coming to it as a point of education, as a point of access, and as a kind of hopefully warm, intelligent point of view. But most importantly, they feel that they can learn from it, which was the intention, and become part of a community. So our plan really is to build that community, to work even more so with brands, so to enable people to have more cohesive and rich and authentic relationships with the arts.
You've just mentioned that topic, working with brands and breaking it down in a practical sense. What does it look like when partners or individuals want to work with you?
So partners and individuals can come to us as a business in two different ways. They can work with us as a marketing and communications business to help them build out their narrative and understand how that business can create footprints and mark makers within the art world or the art market specifically. How can they have rich and meaningful conversations, both directly with artists and both also with institutions? And how can they have a relationship that is much more symbiotic and create great partnerships and collaborations from that? So art adjacent businesses. And then the Wick is a place where we can provide creative solutions, where brands can work with us on branded content. We have a lot of video content, an ability to bring stories to life on the platform, and also to leverage our audience. So we have fantastic community-based audience across our business. And what we're finding is when we put unusual combinations together of arts and fashion and culture and creativity, people feel so excited by, sometimes I suppose it's curating curators. We're able to bring together great voices and educate people across industry. So people can work with us as businesses or as individuals. One of the things that's really excited me about the business and the Wick and what that has enabled us to do in the last year or so is really to build and develop experiences directly joining ourselves with artists and organisations that want to develop this story of the culturally curious. So we've been privileged to work to build exhibition formats and to work with fantastic curators and makers, whether that be Echo Ishun and Like Paradise at Claridge's Art Space, or Fatal Sustek and Conrad Shawcross with Vacheron Constantin.
Can you tell me more about the phrase connecting the culturally curious, which is something that I mentioned right off the bat in the introduction, that's very deeply ingrained in your business? What does that mean to you? What does it mean to the Wick? But also, what does it mean within the framework of society as a whole? And dare I say, the tendency for people to potentially lack a little bit of curiosity about culture?
So I think a big part of connecting the culturally curious, it came about really sort of from this art adjacent relationship that I was seeing come about through other clients, through different types of industries. And I knew there was a curiosity of them to want to collaborate with art, but they weren't quite sure how to do it. And in what we do and what I do as an individual, what we do as a team, what the business does is connecting the dots effectively. And I hope that what we really try and do is, rather than create experiences or content purely for those content or experiences' sake, is we want to inspire intelligent and meaningful debate. So for me, I've always been known to be a curious person. I ask questions all the time. I constantly say to anyone on my team, like, please ask questions, please ask questions. And I think a big part of it was understanding that there are people in all different types of walks of life, socioeconomic backgrounds, types of career backgrounds. It doesn't mean that they're not culturally interested. It might be that their curiosity, they've not had the confidence to transcend or go over those boundaries or hurdles that they see. So the ambition connecting the culturally curious is, how can we help you connect with your own curiosity, your own mission, and want to understand culture in more meaningful ways?
And why is access, or I guess in your opinion, why is access to art so important? And how does the Wick play a part in giving that access?
Well, I mean, I think you're doing this brilliantly with the work you're doing with Next Gen, because I think there's this really, I don't know if you agree, but my view is, I'm fortunate, to come from London. I've always had access to culture because we're living in a city with hundreds of museums and some of the best arts educational operations in the country, but not everyone has that. And I think this idea of access to the arts is vital for so many reasons, not just economically. So we see that it's worth 126 billion just to the UK alone. And that's, a huge amount of money, which is so sad given when we look at sponsorship and the public funding of institutions is so low on the agenda. So that's a big portion of something I'm really looking to lobby for, and also to actively work in trustee positions to help raise that profile and audience. But I think access is important for health. I think for our personal health, emotional health, art helps us give us context to who we are. And I think as Grace and Perry has said, art helps us often to find the words when we don't have them. It gives us a blotting paper to our life that is a meaning that we sometimes don't quite know ourselves. And I think it often is a kind of signpost in our lives that directs us to different places. And I think also really importantly, art and our health, it's not just hearsay anymore that art has a vital impact on our health. DCMS released a report last week with Daisy Fancourt from UCL. And that report has made some incredible moves forward around how art and visual art, and actually taking in performing and visual art, can quite literally affect the prefrontal cortex in our brain. So it affects us. Yeah, it's a huge move forward because they've changed the way they were doing the research in the cohort groups. And what they found is that when you consume a certain amount of art, that you have a reaction that affects future indicators of dementia and reduces effects of depression.
Oh my God, I'm going to link that in the show notes. For anyone listening, I'm going to find it and link it in the show notes. Yeah, it's wild.
From an impact point of view, we're really committed, and we've actually got things hopefully launching very soon linked to social impact, which I'll hopefully be able to come and chat to you about in the future. But in terms of that art and health piece, what is so fascinating is they're seeing that if you at a younger age or an older age were investing time in the arts, you would be saving on the medical side of things, over £1,000 a year. And so if you go back to 2018 and you have Matt Hancock doing social prescriptioning in the arts, people were a bit reticent, thinking, well, why? How can art change anything? But, we are seeing neurological effects on it. And also, if you remember in lockdown and COVID, we had kids painting rainbows, museums were going online, talks and panels. And I think so many people drew a lot of inspiration and a lot of resilience through art. Kind of was one of the only kind of continuations at a very difficult time for people.
I think, and not to kind of have a darker twist on it, but when I was lucky enough in 2023 to do a TEDx talk at UCL, and it was on, can consuming art increase empathy? And the answer is yes, it can. So why don't we engage with it enough? And I think having a report like that really can make a difference in showing people that there are statistics behind it, which is often sometimes the thing that we need to push people forward. Yeah. But also part of the talk, and this is why I said, taking a darker twist, is the power of art. In World War II, in Nazi Germany, they had what was called Entartete Kunst. They tried to censor certain types of art. If art didn't have power to move masses, if art didn't have that power to impact people, their decisions, their emotions, to impact society, people wouldn't fight so hard to change it, to keep it down, to change our visual languages and what we see. I mean, now, and I might not keep this in the episode, we'll see, but with the Trump administration and his move towards a more classical architecture, that was also something that they did in the 1940s. And so, these sorts of things, people don't consider how big of an impact they will have on us. And we're sitting here from the art world point of view saying like, hey, look, this is huge. This is so important. And having a report like that to really look at like, oh my God, it affects our brains, our personalities, our health, both mental and physical. That's huge.
It's ginormous, and I completely agree with you that people have underestimated it today. I think people are sitting and looking up now because they're seeing that art is one of the only disciplines, as you say, through times of fracture, sociologically, politically, spiritually, it completely transcends all of that. And it is one unifying tool that communities, countries, individuals can use to actually connect with each other. And at a time when I think we're more fractured than ever, that is really starting to become quite valuable. But I think the other reason in terms of access to the arts is important in terms of how we're operating is that my observation is that unless you have come often from a very specific background with wealth bracket, price points, academic price points, or where you live, it's very hard to access the arts in a broad manner. And so I think any learning tools, access tools, individuals that can help with that, I think are really important.
Yeah. And just kind of circling back in order to use an incredibly corporate phrase, I would love to talk a little bit more about your role as a CEO and kind of the more of that sort of practical side of things, what that looks like. So for people who would love to get a better idea of what you do, can you actually take me through what your day-to-day looks like? What are your responsibilities?
So my day-to-days are quite intense, and I think it's quite important. I would say definitely people probably have the Instagram version of my life, and then there's the real version, and it definitely looks probably a lot more glamorous than it actually is.
You came here in this gorgeous suit, and I was like, you look great. And you were like, well, I have a talk later today. And I'm just like, okay, I'm here in my t-shirt that needs to be ironed.
No, you always look immaculate. There's kind of different parts of my day. Ultimately, a big balance for me is I'm operating this, the operational and the creative and the client servicing and the team servicing. And those are kind of all very big sort of chunks of a pie that have to be addressed every single day. So if you want to go on a literal level, my day is broken up usually into 30-minute blocks. And each of those blocks is assigned every single moment. Usually I will look into my calendar and has been sort of pre-assigned to certain things. And so every day usually will have a different focus. We obviously have quite a large client-facing side of our business. So we have a very client-first attitude. So before I start anything in the day, I will always check what our clients need on a work day. And I will always be responsive to our clients and make sure that we're aware as a team sort of where that client's at. Is there anything we need to deliver? All of those types of things. And then my day, I would say, is it always starts with a team kickoff, looking at what are our priorities for the day, what do we need to do, what do we need to achieve and get done that day. And then usually I will split the week up into different focuses. So for example, Monday is quite heavily operational for 2 to 4 hours. And then Tuesdays, we will have our content where we have our writers. So we have writers from the FT, from Vogue, from different disciplines who are part of our wider collective team. And that's often as well when our collective consultants come in. So we have a moment in the week when everyone is together. So discussing editorial ideas, looking at content and programming, which is often part of our service where we're delivering talks and moments. So it enables us to really come together, be creative and share that. And then we'll also have obviously client meeting days, which are, very kind of usually presenting, putting together pitch decks, putting together plans, proposals. And then I would say at least 3 nights a week, we're delivering client activations, or I will be sort of doing work, I suppose, advocating on a business level. I don't really want to say female founder level, which is strange because I champion so many women, and we've become known for actually a platform called Monday Muse, which is all around celebrating women who create impact and legacy. I think for me, it's more than just, the female question. It's how can leadership be something that becomes fluid and seamless, and how can we achieve the best way of doing that as a human? And I've come from, I'm sort of follow the Buddhist path of things, which is, I suppose, not really gender specific in any way. It's more a philosophical way of life. And so, yeah, the days are intense, but in terms of, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a get up at 5 a.m., go and do some yoga, etc. I do have spiritual practice, but I've learned that trying to do it as intensely as I was trying to do it at one stage of my career journey, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I was setting my alarm at 5:45. I was trying to do the meditation and the yoga and the journaling. And I've got to be honest, excuse my language, it's all bullshit. Whoever says they're doing all of that every day and doing everything else is just not possible. But what I would say is I do small things that add to that, but in a way that's realistic to a busy life, which everyone I think in London has, whatever age and stage you are. So for example, I have some mantras, which are sort of 3 podcast songs, which I just put on as soon as I wake up. Whatever happens, I put them on. I have this 5-minute gratitude journal. I don't unfortunately have time to do the creative pages, which I'd love to do. I do them on holiday, but not in the work week. And I think, honestly, ultimately, I've spent a lot of time on my own development. So I'm quite self-regulated as a person. I hope when people meet me, whether you were to meet me in the middle of an event of 100 people that we're running and delivering, or if I'm performing a talk as kind of the creative director of the Wick, or here with you, you're seeing the same Katy and you're experiencing the same person. And I think for me, that is the goal as a leader, is how you can achieve that.
I actually feel incredibly validated by what you said, because you and I, before we started this episode, we were talking about how I'm currently managing my time as now working independently, running my own business, handling different projects, some of which I'm not allowed to announce on air, but all in good time. And what I do is, I dedicate certain days for different projects. So Monday is for next gen, or actually typically I take Monday off in the sense that I do emails, I do little bits, but I take Monday for myself to take it a bit slow, to go grocery shopping, life admin bits. Tuesday, next gen. Wednesday, podcast. Thursday, meetings. Friday, other stuff.
Yeah, you do. I think you have to structure your weeks, because if you don't, the challenge I think you have as a CEO, one of the different challenges, and it's something I think I've spoken a bit with Awita about on a mentoring level, is when you go from being an individual to a team, there is a massive shift. And anyone listening to this who's thinking of building a team, I would say do not do it lightly, because your time is not your own anymore. You have to give when we talk about empathy, I may have structured my day immaculately and suddenly someone on the team needs a chat for half an hour. Someone needs help with something. A client has an issue that they've called me about. And those people, team, client, have to come before me. So my day has to jig around their day. And that does make for very long days, because sometimes you're moving 2 or 3 hours worth of work out of your working day, either to your evening, your morning, or the next day. And so naturally, when you have teams, it does mean that you are doing greater proportions of work. However, the flip side of that, which I've really started to see kind of myself draw great pleasure from, particularly as I've become older, is you see cohesion and group movement towards something which is a goal, which is exciting. And they're both quite different ways of working, but I think they're both really important to think about. And I think not enough people talk about that challenge and how how do you do that well, and how do you do it whilst retaining balance as a person? I mean, balance of time, again, I think is rubbish. There's no such thing when people say, what do you do to balance your time? I don't have any balance. I have like 120, 40-hour work weeks. They're big. But the balance is in me as a person. And I know that many of the things I'm doing, it might be an evening. For example, I got the chance to interview Michaeline Thomas for the Wick this week, which was amazing. And then that evening, I was supporting her show and the Linda show at the Hayward Gallery, which Rachel Thomas has curated, both fantastic shows. Now, is that work? Is that pleasure? Is it a hybrid of the two? And for me, I'm often operating at that point of juncture, which is, I think, when you get quite a lot of great pleasure, because yes, you're working, but you're also receiving huge amounts from that work. Personally, it's enriching and it's fulfilling. And it's so important as well, because I think when I meet people who are maybe earlier in the career journey than myself, I have sometimes spoken to and mentored people who are very over-boundaried, but also with boundaries comes pressure on yourself. And I think it's really easy if you say, I must have all my work done by 6:01, because if I don't, I failed. And if I'm speaking over that time, not to say you need personal time and you need to be able to switch off, and you need time when you're not on your phone, you are fully engaged and present. And that's one of the things that I absolutely have been rock solid about since the age of 22. When I'm in a conversation with someone, it does not matter what's going on around me, whether I'm in work, in an event, at home, in a relationship with my family, I will be present in that conversation. I'm not distracted. I'm not reading my phone at the same time. I put my phone down. And when I'm having a meal with someone or having a conversation with you, I'm not flipping between the two, because I think that creates a lot of stress in the body, in our neurology as well, because my family is highly medical, so I'm quite interested in the medical side of things. But most importantly, you have to give yourself the opportunity to, as you say, perform in a way that enables you to be your best, but also understand that with elements of structure, for example, if you're in a job and not an entrepreneur like yourself, it might be give yourself the flex to say, okay, whilst the job is structured at whatever, 9 till 5 or 10 till 6, I can find elements within that structure that suit myself. So whether it's, I've decided that it works for me to have an 11 to 12 brunch rather than have an early breakfast and a late lunch, or it works for me to go and sit away from my team and have an hour's research time every day because that's how I get my best work done. I think you have to find those tactics and tools for yourself as an individual.
Yeah, it's funny because, and again, we digress a little bit, but I was listening to a podcast, one that I really, really love. It's Working Hard, Hardly Working by Grace Beverly. And I really respect her as a professional. Also like such inspiration when it comes to producing a podcast.
Yeah.
And it was her most recent one with, and I'm going to have to look up who it was with and who the guest was because I hadn't heard of him before. And they were talking about how to start off your day and why the first, few hours, few minutes of your day are incredibly important.
Completely.
And how even if you are sort of within the, I guess, quote unquote, constraints of a full-time job, that doesn't mean that you can't start your day with something that's more creative or something that, motivates you to continue throughout your day in a more positive manner, in a more motivated and energized manner.
Completely.
If that means that you start your day with, as you say, like if it fits better to start at 11 with a brunch, or, you start at 9 and then have your brunch at 11, or, if you have that routine and that is something that really works for you, that's really positive. But also if you can't build it into your workday, like when I was working full time, I couldn't build it into my workday. I was the person that was getting up at 5:45.
Yeah.
I'd go to the gym, I'd come back, I would have my breakfast, and I'd sit down and answer emails. All about art podcast emails, other sorts of freelance emails, and then I'd get ready and go to work. But that also meant that I was in bed by 9:30. If I had planned to go to an event, I would either really have to say, hey, I have to go, or I wouldn't get up early the next morning, etc. But again, I digress, but it's about finding a routine that works for you and also being really honest about that. I think that there's a lot of people that say, oh, you need to do this and this and this and this and this. But your honesty when you sit here and say, I don't look at my phone.
Yeah.
When I'm with my family, I put my phone away.
Yeah.
That's really important. That's
Completely.
really important to say.
I think
as well.
It's also being respectful of your environment, because at work I have to be on my phone all the time, all day, immediately responsive. So my weekends, I'm quite like a hermit. I really don't. I spend one-to-one time with people. I don't love going on big nights out. For me, like the dream scenario is cinema, dinner. I love great food, great restaurants. So for me, like a new restaurant, one-to-one company, films are like my way of just really switching off. And also I think the Buddhist side definitely shows I do try. The one thing I do without fail, I do a gratitude journal, which is so simple. It's called, I think it's Tim Ferriss's journal, the Bulletproof Journal. And it takes 5 to 8 minutes. And you just write in each day, what are the 3 things I'm grateful for this morning? What are the 3 things I want to achieve today? And then at the end of the day, you say, what are the 3 great things that happened? And I really think it shifts your muscle memory because effectively it's just changing yourself from a lack mindset into an abundance mindset. And it's doing it on a tiny, tiny tweak every day. And I hope my team would say, or anyone who's worked with me, that generally I would say I'm quite positive about everything. Like I try and see the best scenario or the best case in everything. I mean, the other thing to be realistic about, and again, there's so many different types of jobs, each thing has sacrifice, right? So either you're part of a bigger company with structure, security, a pay slip, and you have an opportunity to move up the ranks, earn more money, and have safety. With that, you may have to give up some flexibility around when you get to work, whether you're working from home, what your job role looks like, or you may want to be a solopreneur where you have freedom over your day, but you may be awake at night worrying about, am I going to be paid tomorrow? What's going to happen? Where am I getting funds from? You might be sick, and then the one source of income you had that week, you can't do the job, you can't get the funds. What we don't talk about enough is the aligned responsibilities that come with these 2 different decisions. Instead, we have a lot of, I think social media doesn't help because we have a lot of people on social media who are selling a dream that is not always sort of on point, because behind that dream, content, let's talk about content's a really good example. You and I both do a lot in the content game and have done for a long time. Content's really expensive. It takes a lot of time. And so you have to be thinking realistically, like, where am I spending my time? What kind of business am I creating, and what does that look like? And am I being realistic with myself about what's achievable and what direction I'm going in?
Yeah. And because you just mentioned it about, entrepreneurship and the reality of it, thinking back to the beginning, what actually led you to venture into entrepreneurship? And what were those first few years like?
So I honestly never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I used to say for about 5 years, I was like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm just doing stuff. I'm just doing my thing. And it's only now
I'm just
like,
running
okay,
a business
and now
solo, independently.
But I think it happened accidentally. And it was because when I left my last job, it was quite a big job, as in a huge company. And I think to start off with, I thought, oh, I love this job, and I'm not sure if I would be able to find an equivalent. And then the other part of it was, I think I definitely couldn't find a business that was equivalent to the one that I have created, which was I couldn't see this fusion between the art world and creative or global brand and global business. Yeah. And I couldn't understand why. Latterly, I now understand why. It's bloody hard. And you have to learn a hell of a lot because effectively I came from a business creative industries background. So that was fine. I knew all of that. But the art world is not an easy market on the public or private sector. They're incredibly intricate pathways. The ecosystem is very complex. And so to learn that from scratch, having been an expert in all other industries effectively, was a real lesson in humility because it was hard to suddenly not be the expert and, walk into a room and everyone know who you are, which was at the stage of the career I was in. My last role in all of the areas I was working in. But more importantly, I think to understand that I had to go back to the beginning. So I was at age 30 plus, I was the assistant again. I was the listener again. I was the absorbing information. I was writing lists. I still do it, actually. I have a notebook and I test myself. Now, obviously, I actually hopefully know pretty big amount, actually. What's unbelievable, what I would say, is what you can accumulate knowledge-wise is insane if you put your brain to it. And I think, in all honesty, I had some depression at the time for personal and professional reasons. I was feeling quite isolated in my life. And at the time, I said to the gallerist I was working with, Harry, look, you have this insane library. I really need to learn a shitload of information right now. And I don't really know what else to do other than I just need to come every night and every weekend and I need to read and I need to study. So I was working in the day all day, building my client roster. And then at night, I was doing all of the reading and the learning and the understanding. And then when I could, I would go to events and actually really people learn. So learning the tangibles, the intangibles, learning the qualifications of my environment. So really understanding if I want to build business and sell into this environment, like what is the environment? And partly as well, it's led me to being so engaged with the arts. I really love it that, I started thinking, well, how do collectors and patrons, like how does that all work? And I was at Johnny Yeo's studio. Johnny Yeo is an amazing portrait artist and painter based in London, the guy that did the recent King's portrait. And I was having a drink with Johnny when I first started. And I was lucky in that there were many parallel relationships, right? So I already had a great starting point. And there was a painting on the floor by his feet, and it was a pawn leaf painting. And I said, I love that painting. How much is it? And at the time, I think it must have been around, I hope you don't mind me saying, about £2,000. And I said, wow, okay, it's amazing, but I've just left my job. I don't know what I'm doing. I've got a laptop here. And other than that, I'm sort of starting from scratch, not with any, backing or funding or anything. And so I said, look, would you be able to sell it to me? But could I pay it off like 400 quid a month? And then he was like, oh, okay. Anyway, that was 2013. And I've now kind of become a bit of an art addict, I would say. I've really become obsessed with getting to know artists, understanding their journeys, and understanding this idea around collecting. But actually what it really led to was a really sincere passion for collecting. And so I now have an art collection of over 220 pieces, which makes it sound like I'm an incredibly wealthy person. It's important to say I am not. At times I'm definitely very struggling. But what it did show me is that if you can, I'm often paying things off bit by bit or working with artists, and then I have been gifted a work. But the interesting thing about it, I've never once got rid or sold one piece, because to me, they're all part of this jigsaw of a journey, and every single piece represents a conversation or a moment in time or a show I've worked on. And so that's really interesting for me to learn about myself, that I actually really, what started as I must learn this to do this job became, actually, it's really part of me now. It's
God, I love this instead of I have to learn this.
Yeah, I really do love it. And I'm fascinated by it.
And
my bank balance doesn't. I mean, I'm sure doesn't feel fascinated by it. It's in shock a lot of the time.
Last year I was on an art buying ban. I told myself no more art. Don't buy it. Don't do it. This year I'm not on an art buying ban, and I've had to hold myself back a couple of times already this year.
It's so difficult. And also, as well, when you start speaking to artists and they tell you their journey and their stories. I went to Tracy Emin's Tier graduate show, and oh my God, the most amazing artists. And you get a chance to go in their studio So, and then also, you want to support the practice. You want to elevate what they're doing and tell other people about it and show people and say, this is important. This can actually change the way we see our world. And the more people that can be involved in that, the better.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I get really easily swayed and I want to spend all of my money on art, but then I remember that I have no wall space. And also, again, right now I've just taken the dive into entrepreneurship and I shouldn't be spending my money on art right now. I need to be spending my money on other things.
Totally.
Or making money.
No, that's the thing. I think, let's not get away from the fact. And I think the other thing is business. I mean, business by its title is, a vehicle through which to create commerce. And I think that's the other thing on a creative industries level, because I've worked in many different types of art forms with fashion businesses, with the performing arts, with philanthropic organizations. And one of the things that I feel often I'm in the room to say in those meetings is the uncomfortable truth, which is, this is great, but who's paying for it, or how are we getting you to, gain business advantage from what you're doing? Because it's important that people think in that way. Things, we want creativity to flourish, but creativity cannot flourish without commerce. It cannot flourish without investment. It cannot flourish without organizations and those commercial businesses backing the creative industries or the artistic industries. And I think that's why it's important to become a member of your local institution, to support, if you can, membership cards for accesses to museums, because all of those things make a difference.
Yeah, completely. I have a penultimate question for you. Mm-hmm. In the industry of PR, marketing, and communications, it generally requires you to have the ability to foresee trends and anticipate how to navigate them. So, what are some of the things that you foresee in the future of PR in the arts and cultural industry that you could potentially divulge with me here today?
So, I would say that the biggest shifts, not just in PR, I think marketing, PR, content, publishing, strategy, they're all becoming much more cohesive as our sales linked to those things and becoming much more united as a discipline. But I think the two drivers, obviously technology is a huge one, the ways in which those disciplines are communicated with. So the rise of that is people as publishers. People who are building their own audiences or businesses that have audiences. And what we've seen there is sort of a reduction of power and influence of legacy publications, or what we would call traditional media. And I think it was announced recently that over 52% of people under a certain age are consuming media purely online through blogs, TikTok, social media content, YouTube. And that's a huge shift in the way that we see the world. I mean, you mentioned earlier Trump, and an example when you look at new media is, if we look at elections and governments, how pivotal, even podcasts like we're on now, podcasts, conversations, we've removed the barrier to creators, founders, policymakers, leaders, and that leadership access through publishing is changing world order, because it's changing what we see, how we see it. So I'm constantly myself and encouraging my team to look at future trends. What is that shifting and changing? The other big shift and change is around collaboration. So we're seeing things being vitally important to more than one or two worlds. So we talk about the art world and then obviously other worlds of fashion and film and technology, and how we're bringing those worlds together. But what we're seeing, for example, with Louis Vuitton and Murakami, you're not just going into a store in New York or London, you're going into an artistic and visual experience. So from a business and retail perspective, people are starting to understand they have to create experience, and they need that for human connection. So conversely, I think human connection is becoming increasingly important. And of course, AI is like a vital tool. And I think AI in many different ways, the way we run, produce businesses, build teams, commercially, economically, and artistically, one of my great friends, Suhair Khan, formerly at Google, is an AI expert. And what she talks about is this constant both friction but collaboration we're seeing between coders, creators, AI workers as artists. Like, where does that start and stop? I think that's really, really going to be important for the future. And then most importantly, which hopefully I think we're leaning into, is niche community and expertise. And this idea, exactly what you're doing with your project at NextGen, how can we create safe spaces with shared dialogue, with new voices mixed with leadership, and how can we kind of increase that understanding of different niche expertise in different areas, not just in art. I think politics is a really important one right now, particularly with where the world's at. And I think also with passions that people have. So food and health is a ginormous push. And for us, we'll be looking into how our life and art touch in all of these different ways.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that amazing forecast.
Well, we try. I mean, I'm fascinated by future forecasts. I'm constantly looking at predicting the future, because that's our job, right? Like, we have clients who are saying, well, what's going to happen next? What do we need to do as a business to innovate, to stay ahead of the trends?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that the art world thinks about those things.
100%. And I would love to, I really could just sit here and talk about all of these things all day, because I have like little things that I could have input on, and I could, make comments on.
Why don't we do a 24-hour podcast?
I think we literally could, because it's like AI, and because I wrote my dissertation on AI and art back in 2020. This was before the big NFT boom. And I talked about authenticity and where that, meets. And then also thinking about, having a more niche approach, or looking at communities that maybe are a little bit smaller, but higher engagement rates. That's exactly what my community is with All About Art, as well as with NextGen. But anyway.
But also collaboration, isn't it? I mean, that's so important, sort of how people are collaborating with different communities, because we will have points where your community will be incredibly valuable to another community. So to share those values and come together is important.
Yeah. And because I'm aware of time, I will ask you my last question that I ask all of my guests here on the podcast.
Already?
Yes, the end already. And it's just a fun one to round off the episode. And I don't know why every time I look at my computer and I read the question, even though I've said this over 70 times now, if you could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
So I did know that you'd asked this question before, so I had thought about it, but it's so difficult because there's so many. And obviously, because I am curious, I would want to have them with many, but I think I'd have to go with Frida Kahlo, who is also at work. I constantly mention Frida. She's sort of, for me, a bit of a kind of feminist icon, but more than that, she is someone who epitomizes this idea of translating pain and passion and really bringing together iterations of the self through lots of different experiences she's had in her life. She was obviously living in Mexico in the 1950s, or making work a lot in the 40s. And I think not only is her work beautiful and exploratory, but it's also at times challenging and painful. She had a really complex personal life, which I feel I can relate to at times. And she was someone who I feel had the resilience and the tenacity to move her work forward, even when it was confronting. She had a partner who was having an affair with a relative and a friend. She was exploring her sexuality all of the time. I think she was very ahead of her time. She was very proud of her culture. And I think, in that pride has created, an ongoing kind of legacy movement. And most of all, for me, I think colour and passion and energy is a big kind of at the heart of hopefully me as a person and the business that we've built. So I would have to say Frida. Eva Frida.
That is an amazing answer. Katy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing your insights, your expertise, for taking the time to sit down with me here today.
And thank you so much for having me, and good luck with your journey.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.